Mangwana ni mwalelepo vukenjani kleklas vanave Africa. Welcome to Africa Good Morning, the news and current affairs show bringing you everything you need to know happening on the African continent and beyond. You are joined by Ashwin Mbedi. These are some of the stories that we are looking at. Bill Gates to give most of his $200 billion fortune to Africa. Germany's Merz says court ruling will not stop migration crackdown. So those are some of the stories that we're going to be looking at on Africa Good Morning. Stay with us as we head into the top stories shortly. All right, let's get into our top stories. Microsoft founder Bill Gates has announced that the majority of his $200 billion fortune will go toward improving health and education in Africa over the next 2 decades. Speaking at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Gates emphasized the need to unleash Africa's potential through better healthcare and education systems. He urged young African innovators to harness artificial intelligence to enhance healthcare, citing Rwanda's use of AI-enabled ultrasounds as an example. Gates reiterated his intention to donate 99% of his wealth by 2045, after which the Gates Foundation will cease operations. Graça Machel welcomed the move, noting its significance during a time of crisis. With cuts in U.S. aid under the America First policy, Gates aims to fill the gap by focusing on maternal health, child nutrition, and disease prevention. Inspired by Warren Buffett, Gates stated he refuses to be remembered as someone who died rich, vowing instead to leave behind a legacy of global impact. And you know, Bill Gates is very passionate about this, recently calling out Elon Musk, the current richest man in the world, for being a part of the aid cuts, which of course have been devastating for a lot of nations. Bill Gates seems to be staying on the same path, as George Bush, who did a lot of work, especially with regards to HIV prevention. Now, in the next story, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has affirmed that his government will persist with its tough migration policies despite a court ruling declaring the expulsion of 3 Somali asylum seekers unlawful. The Berlin Administrative Court ruled that Germany should have processed the asylum applications under EU Dublin regulations, which assign responsibility to the first EU country of entry. He acknowledged the ruling may limit his government's room for action, but insisted there is still legal scope to reject individuals at the border. He emphasized adherence to European law while stressing the need to protect public order and relieve pressure on municipalities. Migration remains a central concern for German voters, contributing to the rise of the far-right Alternative for Germany party, which placed second in February's elections. Critics argue the ruling exposes flaws in his strategy, with pro-Assel calling it for a halt to the current policy. Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt defended the expulsions, promising to present legal justification. The government remains committed to its May directive on rejecting undocumented migrants. Now, the United Nations has confirmed that over 4 million people have now fled Sudan since civil war erupted in 2023, marking what the UN describes as the world's most devastating displacement crisis. UNHCR spokesperson Adrienne Bayona warned that if the conflict continues, many more will flee, threatening global and regional stability. The largest burden has fallen on neighboring Chad, which has received over 800,000 refugees, but only received 14% of the necessary funding to support them. The dire humanitarian situation was underscored by accounts from refugees, including a young girl in Chad who lost her leg in an attack that killed her father and brothers. Her mother had been murdered earlier. UNHCR's Dosu Patrice Ohansu emphasized the brutal conditions faced by those escaping the conflict, with some families forced to use carts pulled by relatives after their animals were stolen by armed groups. The UN is calling for greater international support to address what it calls an unprecedented crisis of protection and humanity. Now, an Al-Qaeda-affiliated group, Jamaat Nusrat ul-Islam al-Muslimin, has claimed responsibility for a major assault on the Malian town of Boulikesi, where it reportedly seized an army base and killed over 30 soldiers, though official confirmation is pending. The group followed up with another attack in Timbuktu, targeting a military airport and Russian mercenaries. Mali's army stated it repelled the infiltration, killing 14 militants and arresting 31 while seizing weapons and vehicles. Witnesses described intense fighting and explosions, with one local source saying the attackers detonated a vehicle packed with explosives near the camp. Unverified footage appears to show militants storming the base and stepping on corpses. The U.S. Africa Command has raised concerns about escalating jihadist activity across the Sahel and its expansion toward West Africa's coastline. The unrest adds to fears of worsening regional instability, with over 400 soldiers reportedly killed by militants across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger since May. Now we swing back to this region as South Africa's economic freedom fighters have taken legal action to halt a proposed 4% fuel levy increase which is set to take effect today. The party argues the hike is unjust and improperly introduced, placing an undue burden on the poor amid high living costs, stagnant wages, and economic challenges. The case was filed in Cape Town's High Court just as the National Assembly prepares to vote on the next budget phase. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana defended the tax measure, insisting it is within his rights and warning that blocking it would create a revenue shortfall of at least $196 million. To cover such a gap, the government would need to resort to borrowing, higher taxes, or spending cuts. Godongwana has already abandoned plans to raise value-added tax following pushback from coalition partners like the Democratic Alliance. Investors are closely monitoring the situation, eager for signs that South Africa can curb public spending and meet revenue targets after years of rising debt. Those have been our top stories on Africa Good Morning. Shortly, we'll be talking to Rorisang Mohoshwe as she brings us the news stories from Botswana. But prior to that, it will be the weather. All right, it's time to talk to Rorisang Mohojwe as she delivers the news from Botswana. Dumela, Rorisang.
Good morning, Dumelang. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on Africa. Good morning.
Africa, good morning indeed. Now, there's a bit of panic because the Botswana government's investment account has gone from 3.8 billion pula to just 700 million pula, which of course makes people worry about the government's fiscal health. Tell us more.
Botswana's government investment account, or the GIA's current balance is critically low. It has dropped sharply from 3.8 billion pula to just only 700 million pula, and officials are raising alarm over the country's fiscal health. The president, as well as the minister of finance, have been talking about this. So this current balance echoes their sentiments that the government coffers are severely depleted. And the Minister of Finance has attributed this decline to a loan repayment of 2.8 billion pula to the Bank of Botswana. And now the top concern is that civil servant salaries of 2.5 billion pula are also due, and officials are warning that this current balance is critically low. A top official in the Ministry of Finance, the accounting officer, said government departments have actually been very slow to adopt cost-cutting measures, while ongoing financial leakages are actually worsening the situation. And so in response to this fiscal strain, as well as a 1.7% economic contraction in 2024. The African Development Bank has approved a $304 million loan in order to support structural reforms through a program called the Governance and Economic Surveillance Support Program, or the GERSP. Now, this initiative aims to stabilize the economy as well as reduce the heavy reliance on diamonds, where sales have also dipped, and promote private sector growth, especially among youth and women-led enterprises.
All right, Rory. Getting into your next story, President Duma Boko has reaffirmed that no public officer will lose their job due to any political affiliation, and this was particularly in reference to the former ruling party, BDP.
So some members of the public, as well as political leaders, have been calling for a sweeping overhaul of the public service, as well as the removal of public service officers who are known to be aligned to the previous regime. However, President Duma Boko came out publicly and reiterated, because this was not the first time he was saying it, he did reiterate the fact that there will be no public service officer who will be fired purely based on their political association with the former ruling Botswana Democratic Party. He was speaking at a high-level engagement with public accounting officers, and he did emphasize that his approach, his administration's approach to the civil service is purely performance-based, will be strictly performance-based, and any public officer will be judged on performance and on merit, right? So now he also made it clear that while political associations will not influence any decisions, poor performance will, however, not be tolerated, because this will actually compromise public services to members of the public. And another thing that he cautioned against in the wake of all of this, in the wake of government efforts to reform the public sector, is that some ministers continue to travel, whether it's locally or internationally, they continue to travel with very large delegations. And this leaves their departments, their ministries severely understaffed, and therefore this compromises delivery of public services. So that he will not stand for, and he's calling on the heads of department as well as ministers as well to reduce the number of the delegations that they travel with in order to actually cut costs, because in the wake of government coffers being severely depleted, this cannot go on. As I have reported before, that some government departments have been known to be very slow to adopt cost-cutting measures, and this has actually contributed to the depletion or to the decline of the government investment account or the coffers of the government. And so these remarks come as government intensifies efforts to reform the public sector, as well as reduce wastage and improve overall results across ministries.
Thank you very much, Rorisang. Before we get into your sport talking COSAFA Cup, of course, a tournament that affects us all, we're going to take a quick break. So we're still with Rorisang Mohojwe delivering the Botswana report. Of course, now she's talking about a tournament that affects us all, the COSAFA Cup, which begins today. Tell us about Botswana's preparations.
Botswana is joining the rest of teams in Southern Africa in participating in the COSAFA 2025 Regional Cup tournament, which is actually starting today on the 4th and will end on the 15th of this month in Bloemfontein, South Africa. Now, this regional tournament is it's going to mark a make or break moment for the head coach, Morena Raborebudu, whose contract actually mandates a win or a COSAFA title win. We do know that this is more than just regional bragging rights for the teams that are participating, but it is actually a build-up to to AFCON 2025, which will take place in Morocco. 8 of the 14 participating nations, including Botswana, will be using this tournament to sharpen their skills, test their squad depths and tactics, as well as build competitive momentum ahead of the continental showdown. Botswana will find itself, or will be in Group D alongside Angola and Zambia, and it's actually proving to be a high stakes environment, and that's going to evaluate the performance of the Zebras as well as the readiness of the Zebras. And we do know that other apologies for that. Other AFCON-bound teams include the hosts, South Africa, Comoros, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania, who have been invited from East Africa. But for Botswana, the pressure is definitely on, not just to perform, but to prove that they can compete at higher levels as they chase regional glory as well as continental impact.
All right. Thank you, Rorisang, for bringing us that update. And of course, the rest of the stories in the Botswana report. You're still with Africa Good Morning. We're going to have a look at the economic indicators.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure. Until next time, Africa Good Morning.
In economic news, Nigeria has begun importing dairy cattle from Denmark in a strategic move to double its milk production within 5 years and reduce its staggering $1.5 billion annual dairy import bill. Livestock Minister Idi Maya announced the initiative, emphasizing that despite having one of Africa's largest cattle populations, over 20.9 million, most of the animals are low-yield pastoralist breeds. Nigeria currently produces 700,000 tons of milk annually, far short of the 1.6 million tons it consumes, resulting in around 60% of dairy needs being met through imports. To address this gap, one Nigerian farm has already brought in over 200 high-yield heifers from Denmark with plans to scale through intensive breeding. The government has also introduced 8 new pasture species, the first in nearly half a century, and launched a national animal genetic resource strategy with support from the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. Maya stressed that Nigeria is not starting from scratch, but building on an already strong base of livestock, including 60 million sheep and 1.4 million goats. That's been our economic news story, and those have been our stories on Africa. Good morning. You can always find us every weekday on DSTV 285, GOTV 25, 1up2.com, and NTV Africa on YouTube. From me, Ashwin Berry, and the Africa Good Morning team, Swera Jaganaka.